President Donald Trump's tariff actions against Canada, Mexico, and China have shaken up the global trade landscape. As it stands, Canada and Mexico face 25% tariffs, while China has been hit with tariffs as high as 60% on certain products. And now, Europe is in Trump's crosshairs. European leaders are gathering in Brussels today for a defense meeting, but all eyes are on Trump's latest tariff threats. As fears of a major global trade war rise, President Trump made it clear that the EU was next on the chopping block, saying they'd taken advantage of the US for too long. He hinted that tariff decisions targeting Europe would come soon, and warned the UK it would be dealing with this issue for some time. These bold statements alarmed EU members, who quickly began evaluating their next moves. In response, French President Emmanuel Macron took a stand, sharing strong words about the tariffs, words that likely caught even Trump off guard. Macron wasn't alone in his concern, as other EU countries also reacted. But Macron's response was especially forceful, suggesting the EU would fight back against US tariffs if they hurt European interests. Stay tuned to see how this trade standoff unfolds, and make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to keep up with the latest updates. At the informal EU Defense Summit in Brussels, French President Emmanuel Macron made a powerful statement. If the US continues to push its aggressive trade policies, Europe must stand its ground and demand respect. He called for a united, stronger European response to the growing pressures from global trade. Macron emphasized the need for Europe to bolster its industrial and technological power, ramp up defense spending, and take a more strategic economic approach to reduce reliance on foreign nations. Macron proposed an action plan focusing on increasing both public and private investments, reforming the European Investment Bank's financing mechanisms, and prioritizing European industries in procurement decisions. He urged EU countries to join France in investing more in defense, stressing that Europe must act as one on crucial issues. This was clearly a response to the mounting trade tensions with the US under President Trump. Macron's comments signaled that France was already preparing to counter Trump's tariffs. Marc Ferrassi, France's industry minister, argued that any trade talks with Washington should include a power dynamic, focusing on US important products to make the response impactful. In short, Europe isn't backing down. The question remains: how will this trade showdown play out? Keep watching as the stakes keep rising. François Villeroy de Gallo, the governor of the Bank of France, has criticized the tariffs imposed by Trump as harsh and damaging. He warned that these tariffs would only escalate economic uncertainty and could have serious consequences. The issue was further debated within the EU, with Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas pointing out that no one wins in a trade war. European Council President Antonio Costa echoed NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte's view that a stronger European defense would also benefit the transatlantic partnership. Rutte noted that the US sells more defense equipment to Europe than the other way around, with a lot of money involved as European NATO members ramp up their defense spending. As defense spending grows, Rutte suggested the US would gain more leverage in trade talks, giving Trump an upper hand in tariff disputes. European leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron, rallied against the tariffs, advocating for a stronger EU response. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said the EU is strong enough to face US tariffs, but remains committed to cooperation. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk warned that a trade war was a mistake, urging Europe and the US to avoid conflict amid growing global threats. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen also stressed that if tariffs were imposed, Europe would respond collectively, but dialogue remains the preferred solution. Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin stressed that the EU and US should work together on trade, as protectionism only harms citizens. Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo called for trade talks with Trump, emphasizing that Russia remains Europe's biggest threat. Luxembourg's Prime Minister, Luc Frieden, argued that while tariffs should be met with countermeasures, they are never ideal. Spanish Economy Minister Carlos Cuerpo affirmed the EU's commitment to trade and globalization, but warned against naivety, asserting the need to protect businesses for fair competition. Most EU leaders supported French President Emmanuel Macron's stance on the tariffs, but they agreed that dialogue, not conflict, is the way forward. Macron has been especially vocal about Trump's tariff plans. If Trump pushes forward with more tariffs instead of negotiating, how will it affect US-France relations? Surprisingly, tensions between the two countries have worsened in recent times. Tensions between the US and France were already on edge before Trump announced his tariffs on the EU. On the very first day of his second term, Trump signed executive orders pulling the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement and the World Health Organization, signaling a shift toward cold relations. Back in 2007, the US and France were in a much friendlier place. With Nicolas Sarkozy's election as France's president, the relationship blossomed. Sarkozy, nicknamed American Sarko, wore it with pride. But things changed after his presidency and US-France relations began to sour. In July 2017, Trump visited France at Macron's invitation, but their differences were clear. After Macron pushed for the US to rejoin the Paris Agreement in 2018, US Congressman Thomas Massie dismissed him as a socialist militarist. By late 2018, Trump mocked Macron on everything from tariffs to the French army, especially after their strained Armistice Day meeting. Macron also criticized Trump's decision to pull US troops from Syria. In 2019, France's ambassador to the US described the Trump administration as isolated, and Macron began questioning America's commitment to Europe. Now, with Trump's latest tariffs, the relationship is more strained than ever. Where does this leave their future? Despite a rocky history, Trump's tariff decision could spell trouble for both the US and France. To understand the potential fallout, it's important to look at the economic ties between the two countries before Trump's tariff announcement. France and the US have had a deep, mutually beneficial relationship for years. After a major rebound in French-American trade following the COVID-19 pandemic, reaching record levels in 2022, the trade dropped in 2023, mostly due to falling energy prices, lower French beverage exports, and reduced cruise ship activity. Still, the overall trade was still higher than pre-pandemic levels. In 2023, trade in goods between the countries totaled 97 billion euros, down 12.4 billion euros from 2022. French imports and exports across various sectors saw a dip. However, France's trade surplus stood at 15.9 billion euros, and services trade grew by about 2%, reaching 70.4 billion euros. French imports of goods rose by 1.7%, while exports increased by the same amount to 43.2 billion euros. The US was France's fourth largest consumer and fifth largest supplier in 2023. After 4 years of surpluses, the trade balance shifted to a deficit of 6.6 billion euros in 2023. The aeronautical industry, medicines, and beverages were major drivers of French exports to the US. How will this trade turbulence unfold? Time will tell. In 2023, France saw declines in all three main export categories compared to 2022. Beverage exports suffered the biggest blow, dropping by 1 billion euros or 20.6%. Other sectors like cruise ships, and pharmaceuticals also saw sharp declines. On the bright side, wind turbine exports helped lift the machinery and tools sector, ranking just behind cosmetics and perfumes. Despite the fluctuations in trade, the economic relationship between France and the US remained stable until now. With Trump's latest moves, tensions are rising and more challenges are expected. This might force France to look for new economic partnerships. So, who could France turn to? Over the years, ties between France and China have grown stronger, marked by high-level talks and cooperation on global issues. A major milestone came in April 2023, when French President Emmanuel Macron visited Beijing, signing several agreements that deepened the bond between the two nations. Macron and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to work together on resolving the Ukrainian crisis and tackling global challenges. In May 2024, Xi's first visit to Europe in 5 years brought even more collaboration, with talks further solidifying France and China's commitment to improving their ties and strengthening their relationship with the European Union. Macron emphasized the importance of Europe's strategic independence while strengthening ties with China, while Xi highlighted China's commitment to unity and cultural exchange with France, signaling growing collaboration. These developments showcase the rising importance of Sino-French relations on the global stage. Historically, France and China have had a complex relationship. Their bond dates back to the 17th century, with France actively trading in China during the 19th and early 20th centuries. However, after France recognized Taiwan, diplomatic relations soured in the mid-20th century. France resumed diplomatic ties with China in 1964, and since then, both nations have engaged in high-level talks, forming various agreements despite political differences. Recently, these tensions have been less prominent. The 2004 creation of the Franco-Chinese Strategic Alliance, aimed at boosting trade, business, culture, and education, has deepened cooperation, paving the way for broader collaboration across many fields. In 2015, China and France made a powerful statement with the China-France Joint Declaration on Climate Change, highlighting their shared commitment to tackling global warming and advancing sustainable development. This declaration played a key role in shaping the Paris Climate Agreement later that year. Since taking office in 2017, French President Emmanuel Macron has prioritized strengthening economic and cultural ties between France and China, recognizing the crucial role this relationship plays in France's growth and global influence. Macron made his first official trip to China in January 2018, where he signed key agreements on nuclear energy, agriculture, and tourism. While pushing China to address trade imbalances and market access issues, Macron also championed greater cooperation between Europe and China. Despite challenges like the COVID-19 pandemic and France's initial skepticism toward China's Belt and Road Initiative, the economic ties between the two nations have only strengthened. By 2019, China had become France's top foreign investor. In 2021, trade between the two reached record levels, and by 2023, bilateral trade had soared to $78.9 billion, marking a staggering 800-fold increase in 6 decades since diplomatic relations were established. The figures speak volumes about the growing partnership between France and China. China has become France's top trading partner outside the EU, but France still holds a key role as a major trade ally within the EU. France's trade deficit with China grew significantly from €1.1 billion in 2022 to €2.92 billion in 2023, meaning France imported more from China than it exported. This shift shows increasing reliance on Chinese goods in France. On the flip side, China's imports from France are estimated to hit $37.33 billion in 2023, signaling China's economic recovery and opening markets. Major Chinese exports to France include electronics, machinery, energy components, and vehicles. With rising US tariffs on the EU, France sees China as a strategic trade partner. Macron's recent comments suggest that France might deepen its trade relations with China, which could shift the balance in global trade. Experts urge a diplomatic resolution to the tariff crisis instead of escalating tensions between the US and EU. Thanks for watching.